let's first up put the spotlight then on the startup landscape and the latest report that has come out from CII on Unicorn 2.0, talking about adding the next trillion. We've got Rahul Garg, who's the co-chairman CII, Unicorn Forum, and the founder and CEO, of course, of Moglix. Thank you so much, Rahul, for taking time out. Given that, India is really known to be a vibrant startup ecosystem, but still at a time like this, there have been concerns about the funding winter. Only 2 startups that have hit the unicorn status this year. But I believe that the report indicates that by FY30, the startup and venture economy could potentially contribute $1 trillion to India's economy. What's the outlook? What's driving that optimism?
Okay, so I think fundamentally we are quite optimistic about the startup and the contribution that they can drive over the coming years, and particularly all the way to 2030, 2045. And within 2030, how can they contribute $1 trillion to the economy? Now, the optimism is driven by a couple of factors. So first is a rapid digitization of every single consumer and B2B service. We have seen already the success of consumer services, whether it is the food delivery, whether it is the cab services, whether it is the e-commerce. The digitization is getting embraced by consumers, not just in metro cities, but also in the tier 2, tier 3 towns. And we think that process will continue and get deeper and deeper into what we call as Bharat within the country. So that's one change that obviously is a macro theme that is driving it. Second is, I think, the growing disposable income of people. I think in the last decade, there is a significant percentage of increase that continues to happen in the middle class of the country. And therefore, their demand for the quality of services and their demand for newer products continues to grow. The third thing is that India continues to now embark on a journey where it can become part of global supply chain or global software product chain using SaaS, which I think has only developed over the last 10 years. We saw one of the largest SaaS company going public in US market, and I think many of those will follow suit in the coming years. And that's the key driving force for this positive optimism around startups' contribution to the Indian economy.
So which are the sectors, if you can highlight for us, that will achieve disproportionate growth?
So firstly, I feel that we are still at very early days of the economy is growing rapidly, as well as digitization in any sector is still like in single-digit percentage points. So most sectors, if you look at the report, we are talking of that even a mature sector like a consumer commerce will grow 5 to 6x of where it stands over the next 6 years. But then there are newer areas, whether it is the manufacturing, whether it is the fintech, they will continue to grow 8 to 10x over the next few years. Now, many of these are dependent, obviously, on the rate of adoption. But we feel that the opportunity is there, and there will be companies which will be able to capitalize on this opportunity in the coming years.
Sure. And Rahul, given that we're now talking about the emergence of Indian startups as global leaders, which are the sectors that you believe this will be focused in? What are the kind of shifts that you believe will define the Unicorn 2.0?
So I think we definitely see that globalization of Indian startups will continue on the upswing, and they can play obviously in the SaaS is one of the more sort of well-established phase, because India did phenomenal in IT services, and the SaaS is kind of bringing global products being built from India. But we would think that as the Indian companies, and I take pride in this fact that if you take the top 10 sectors in India today on the startup basis, every single startup area, the winner is an Indian startup. There's no global startup which is able to capture more market share than an Indian startup, which shows that even in a kind of a tough market, tough terrain market, both with whether it is with respect to average revenue, whether it is with respect to the logistics, if the Indian startups are able to become the dominant player in this market, there is no reason many of those will not replicate this across multiple markets. And we start to see green shoots, obviously, outside of SaaS as well. I mean, Lenskart has gone global, Avanne Company has gone global, Moglix is now playing in few markets. LiveSpace is playing in few markets. So we continue to start seeing this startups starting to play across multiple markets. Oyo went global across multiple markets. So I think you have these cases emerging more and more where Indian companies have established the number one position or a pole position in the country, and now starting to expand across few markets and starting to become dominant in those markets.
And, the report states that building these resilient enterprise unicorns will also require the support from various stakeholders in the ecosystem. Can you walk us through the perspective on that?
So I would say that the startups, while I think the first wave has been built with kind of more encouragement kind of aspect from the different stakeholders within the policy framework and within the investor and ecosystem. I think the second wave, if you want to look at the more complicated ones, the manufacturing startups, I mean, they require deeper policy aspects. We already saw PLI as one of the elements that has started to play out in the manufacturing. And I believe many of the startups already in the EV space are benefiting from those kind of incentive structures and structural changes to fuel manufacturing and the startup landscape in that vertical in the country. The second thing that I would continue to think about is that there is still, India has only got over the, well, $140 billion seems like a large number that has been invested into the country. If you look at it from the global landscape of startup investing, it's still a very micro number as compared to the amount of investing that happens in the two other large startup ecosystems. So I think we need to continue to think of how do we grow this capital availability almost to 5 to 10x over the coming years. How do we take deep tech investments in the country where there is basically the kind of capital required is almost like a 10 to $20 billion for one area. Now, those kind of capital has to come from both a combination of how the sovereign in the India can continue to fuel it, as well as domestic capital being available within the country and domestic capital being incentivized to invest into some of these innovative and R&D oriented sectors within the country. And third is, I think we continue to grow the ease of doing business within the country, because today startups are no longer limited to specific sector. You pick any sector of the economy. Manufacturing is, for example, 20-25% of the economy. Logistics is a large sector. Manufacturing is a large sector. Healthcare. So each of these sectors will get disrupted by startup in some meaningful manner. And you realize that sometimes we need to still do a couple of more steps to make it easy for startups to go out and completely change the landscape of these sectors.
So, given that we have seen startups really contribute to India's GDP growth, has the workforce participation as well increased?
So we, when we started this report, we didn't add exact number of what is the number of jobs being impacted by startup. Now we look at around north of 12 million jobs directly, indirectly has been attributed to startups. Almost 10 to 15% of the GDP growth contribution has come from startups. We feel over the next 6 to 7 years, there's almost like a 50 million jobs that are going to be created by all these innovative startups which are coming and scaling within the country and catering to whether it is the domestic or the international market. So there is clearly a massive amount of job creation and the economic impact that is driven by startups, not just in past, but going forward.
Rahul, given that, the VC activity as well has been growing at a healthy clip, is there substantial scope now for additional growth relative to the global leaders?
Absolutely. I think as Indian companies start to look at global markets, the capital inflow, I believe, will continue to increase. Obviously, there has been some amount of correction that also happens depending on what is the global outlook and so on and so forth. So we did see some amount of correction in 23 for that matter, but I believe 24 and going forward, this capital infusion will continue to increase. And we also expect more and more domestic capital to come into the startups.
And, has there been any observation of the mix of the founders in the startup ecosystem changing, maybe founders from non-traditional backgrounds?
I think we didn't had that statistic captured as part of report anywhere. I think there is clearly still a significant amount of probably engineers starting the companies because many of these disruptions are tech-led. But as I see the broad basing of the startups going from manufacturing, healthcare, and many other spaces, I would feel that both from the type of entrepreneurs doing startups as well as geographies from where they are doing startups will continue to increase. I think there are more startups now looking at how do they solve for localized problems across tier 2, tier 3 markets as well. So I would say that both are happening simultaneously. India is a very entrepreneurial country. I mean, before startups also, there has been a definitely a lot of entrepreneurs across the different parts of the country. Now those entrepreneurs are thinking about technology first and scale in their thinking along with the base entrepreneurship they are used to.